forge your inner armor. Welcome to the Inner Armor Podcast with Dr. Timothy Royer, where we explore ways to train our brains and bodies to become dynamically resilient so that we can all, from professional athletes to ordinary people, perform at our potential. Well, welcome back to the Inner Armor Podcast. I'm here as always with Dr. Royer, and it's that time of the year because the academic year is beginning this fall, and that means that students of all ages will be going back to school, which brings all kinds of interesting and exciting possibilities and opportunities into their lives, but some unique challenges as well. And today, Doc has an interesting guest who's going to talk to us about the challenges of going back to school and some of those opportunities. So, Doc, do you want to introduce our special guest today?
Yes, absolutely. I'm excited to have Neil with us today. Neil, you in the last 6 months have the most listened to podcast on the Inner Armor podcast. I don't know what you did, but everybody downloads your podcast. And I would say, one, it's you, and two, what you do is something that people really are looking for help and information with. So we said, no better time than right now to have Neil back, because we think about getting back to school. And, I have 4 kids. They're all adults now, but I can remember this time of year, you've had them around the house. It was fun at the beginning, but now it's like, it's time for them to get back to school at whatever level. But you have to prepare for that, right? Like, you don't just it's time for school at any level, but especially at the university level where they're not going to live with you. They're going to, be maybe across the country. And so we think of the things that they need that you pick up at Walmart or Target, but there's so much more that they need that you provide. So can you give a little introduction of yourself, Neil, to the audience if they didn't listen to the other one? And then let's get right into this, because I think this is an important topic for everybody that has kids.
Absolutely. Well, thanks. I don't know exactly what to attribute that to. Maybe it's how many times I listen to it myself because of my overly critical nature, but I have a lot of family and friends that I think really enjoyed, listening to that, and have since really, come alongside your very innovative approach. And we have certainly appreciated it here at, Liberty University where I am working, and I'm working with athletes specifically, but working in an academic institution. And, I have gravitated towards this type of environment for several reasons. One, my love for learning, and just because I love learning doesn't necessarily mean it's been easy for me either. In recognizing that there are challenges and certain barriers to overcome, and then I think a lot of what we'll be talking to today, as far as what you are bringing up for a topic, you'll probably see a lot of your past episodes really intertwined with some of the things we're going to be discussing today. And so I will say too, about my background, I've worked in an academic setting, most of my life, between all the years I've spent in college now at this point, probably as many years as I've spent in my career. But also, the learning environment is one where I think it really challenges us and tests us in many ways, and both good and bad, right? So, what you're speaking to here as parents have the daunting task of preparing themselves as well as their children to begin school again. It can be extremely complicated, but one that requires some real intentional focus. And I wonder if some of what the interest has been around this very topic, right? So counseling and education and all these things really, I don't know how you can't look at them together, right? Because we get really curious about, what it is exactly that gets in people's way. And in academic issues can very quickly become a counseling issue. So, I'm not surprised that this is a hot topic for you, especially given the amount of need that there seems to be out there in our country right now. And so I think we're going to get into some of that as well. So look, it's really a privilege for me to be here and really thank you guys. I've really enjoyed the podcast and I'm looking forward to being able to contribute in some way.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Neil. So let's talk about the you've got this timing. So we're talking about college students, and we'll first maybe just talk about freshmen, because each year it's kind of a different scenario, right? You know, you have that first year coming in as freshmen, you got kind of those middle couple years, and then you've got this last year where you're maybe taking exams to go on to graduate school. Maybe you don't know what you're going to do, and this is kind of the last year to do this. And so, but I'd first like to talk about freshmen coming in and what is it that you see, and also, you know, what's unique developmentally at this stage. Like we had this higher education thing that's happening, right? Which when you look at the brain, it's probably the most optimal time when we look at it neurologically, that the brain can absorb huge amounts of information that aren't just data, but actually reasoning and theoretical kind of stuff. So the brain is timed right, but there's also like other developmental features that I'm just wondering if you could kind of speak to that positively or negatively as a freshman coming in, you know, 18, 19-year-old.
Yeah, this is always been an area I've loved. So I love working with young adults and adolescents, especially through the developmental life cycle changes and things that are going on at this time. But I also love the energy of this age group, right? And so, you know, when I speak to the football team yesterday, and I just love how excited they get, and, you know, there's all this new energy and things like that. And, you know, our freshmen are coming in and experiencing like, oh, wow, the wonderment, right? There's a certain, you know, wonder to starting what feels a little bit more independent anyways, right? And our college age students have some definite challenges, you know, in front of them, and exciting challenges, right? Where they're learning some independence, but they're not fully independent yet. They've got this period of time where they're in college, and, you know, they're experiencing, you know, some independence for the first time. But also, you know, one of the things I've always loved, right, is that the world is kind of wide open for this age group, right? Like they're trying to figure out what they want to do. So identity development is a big part of this, but they're also not hindered by anything, because all the possibilities are wide open, and they can choose anything. They've been told all their lives they can do anything they want. And they believe that. And I think it's good to believe that. And then the things that tend to get in our way are the things that have told us that, oh, we can't do this. We're not smart enough. We're not good enough. We're not whatever enough. That tends to be the roadblocks that get in our way. And some of that shapes us and helps us find our way into, you know, our giftings, and find, you know, hopefully careers that, you know, are based on, you know, our strengths. But we're challenged during this time period to evaluate both our strengths and our weaknesses. And that can bring up a lot of stuff we maybe want to avoid or not deal with. And that's where I think I see a lot of them in counseling. But this is exciting for me because I really love seeing the way that our young adults are so excited to take on this new stage and be independent, but also figure themselves out and just be completely wide open to all the possibilities. That's a really fun time for me to watch students figure it out.
Yeah. And it's just fresh and new, right?
Yeah.
But I think with it comes these challenges. That's why you're there. That's why you're there, right?
Sure.
That's why you have a job. Is there? It's not just all roses, right? This is the probably first significant separation that's occurred. And with that can bring up maybe previous losses.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to kind of what you've seen from a psychological, emotional side, maybe specifically towards like anxiety and depression that can happen, and maybe how to like prepare ahead of time for in case this happens? Because what's maybe even tougher sometimes is when you anticipate something's going to be this wide open, free floating, exciting, independent, and then it's not, and you're feeling a certain way and you feel conflicted because, you know, everybody knows this should be the best time, but it's not the best time. So you almost feel guilty or shameful about that. So can you speak some to that and what you see when they come through these doors for the first time?
For sure, right. I mean, you get a lot of these expectations that get placed on us that this is supposed to be, so good, and then that can lead to a certain amount of disappointment if our expectations aren't realistic. But also, you're right. There's a lot of challenges that you just couldn't even anticipate, and someone can tell you all about them. But until you're actually in that situation, and your values are challenged in a lot of ways, it is when it really is where the rubber meets the road. And so, there are so many things that are this current generation is facing, whether some of it's societal norms or different, complications within the generation itself, or just the nature of a transition this big. You think about incoming freshmen and the excitement that is built up, and, they've toured the college that they're going to, and they're super excited to start, and they think everything is going to work out and that they're going to instantly have friends, or whatever. And then now all of a sudden it's very different. So you brought up anxiety and depression, and let's be honest, this transition is very isolating for several reasons. I think one, you haven't even had time to develop the depth of relationships that you're used to back home, where, maybe that wasn't all good either, but at least you knew it was predictable. It was, a little bit more in your control. And now you come here, and then now all of a sudden you talk about anxiety and anticipating and try to gain back control. And what do I have control over? Can I put myself in more social situations to not deal with the loneliness? And now all of a sudden you have all kinds of healthy and unhealthy ways of dealing with that, whether it's, hey, I need to go to a party, or, hey, I need to do this or that to loosen up, or, maybe I try to get in with a certain crowd that's a little bit more accepting, but maybe that's not the best crowd, or, maybe my studies take a back seat because I'm just trying to develop some emotional security by, finding my group or what I want to get involved in, or I take on too many activities, right? There's all kinds of things that can happen, both good and bad. And I don't want to suggest it's one or the other as much as it is the very thing that, and I'm going to use the word that you seem to bring up a lot in these podcasts, is this issue of presence. I think it can almost reverberate in us or create a certain vibration that says I have these emotional needs I need to get met. And then it becomes a survival instinct and trying to just survive and find your group and settle into a groove and do all the things that you need to do. And it robs us of presence. So whether it's on the isolating side and we're finding ourselves alone in a crowded room, or whether we're more on the anxious side where we're trying to control and predict and think about the future and manage these relationships, it can be really tricky to navigate if we're not being present and focused on our self-care and emotional well-being, as well as developing some depth and quality of relationships to help us create that safe base to be able to navigate in a way that's healthy and productive. And when I say healthy and productive, I don't mean that it's without challenge, right? Because challenge is good. And actually, I would even say that we need challenge, and that comfort can at times be really good if we need to recover or reset. But challenge is necessary in order for us to grow and move forward in different ways. And comfortability can leave us stagnant. And there are just some things that we have to be really paying attention to during this process. And a lot of that's going to be, how are we coping and how are we dealing with these challenges, and what do we do about the anxiety, the depression, the isolation, the loneliness, the pressures, all the things that come up.
Yeah, it reminds me of the checklist that we give all the student athletes there at Liberty that come in, the ASR. I mean, we literally have, thousands of these over the last few years. Yeah. And it's a fantastic tool. And I love how it's broken up, because it doesn't just ask right out of the chute, what are all the things that are not going well, right? It first focuses on these adaptive skills, relationships, schoolwork, social functioning, your job, which in many cases for an athlete is their sport.
Right.
And it kind of analyzes these things that in life all of us use to cope or deal with things. And so it first is looking at, I think, the stability of the safety net. And it's like, okay, what kind of defense mechanisms, adaptive skills do you have? Mm-hmm. And then from there, we go into the other stages of this checklist that we use there at Liberty that then ask the clinical questions. Are you restless? Sometimes, very often, not very much. And then, goes to 113 things, about mood, sleeping, all kinds of things. And you get your clinical scales, but you don't look at those in a vacuum, right? You don't just say, Johnny looks like Sally on these clinical scales, but we interface, and this is what you do really nicely with this instrument, Neil, is you're interfacing, well, how much safety net is there? Because like you said, we do need pressure so we don't stagnate. We need that to grow. And during this stage of development, that pushes us to form our identity. But if our safety nets have all kinds of holes in them, right? We don't have the relationships. We don't have confidence in the arena that we're being tested in, which is academics or in athletics. We've been the star athlete our entire life through club sports and through, high school sports. And now all of a sudden the water level's at a different level because we're with Division I athletes from across not just the country, the world. Right. And so that can challenge the safety net. So can you speak to that a little bit? Like how do we try to develop more of these adaptive skills? Right. Maybe prior to coming in, but also, when they get there, what are some things that we're looking to do?
Yeah, I think, again, we're talking about a very complicated issue. We'll try to make it as simple as we can, right? Because there are a lot of things that we can manage and focus on and prioritize. And then we can be overwhelmed by all the things that are good to do and versus the things we need to do. And I do love this tool. You mentioned the ASR and look, I use this with every single person I meet with, right? So I meet with somebody first, just help me understand the presenting problem. What do you come into therapy for? And before our next session, I want someone to fill out this questionnaire. So at least what that does is it gives us a guide to help us understand, well, what are we working with here? Both the good and the bad, right? So, I love that first page of the ASR. This is strengths, but I like to think of them as protective factors. What is that safety net that we have? And let's just make sure that safety net is in place, it's intact, and it's working properly. And are there any holes, like you say, in the net? And so these protective factors, if we're intentional about putting the right things in place, it doesn't mean that trouble is going to come, but it means that when that trouble does come, there's not going to be a hole in the net that I'm going to slip through and have a catastrophe. It means that something's going to catch me and I'm going to be able to withstand or weather the storm, so to speak. Because this is a time of storm and trial. And I think that's what life is. And that's what grows us and challenges us or makes us more bitter, resentful, hurt, isolated, whatever those things are. And so if those things are intact and in place, then I can operate in a more creative way, right? And I use this word creative specifically to kind of talk about that right brain activity that says, I can be more natural, be more myself. I can let things happen. I can be flexible as life challenges really affect me, and I can be confident that I'll make it through. I might not know how I'm going to, and it may be distressing, but at least I can have some confidence knowing that I have the right things in place to get me through. And I think that builds a lot of confidence. And so, one of the things that's helpful about this tool is it compares against averages, and I can look at, all of the Liberty student athletes. How do you do in comparison to the athletes? But I can even look at your team and say, hey, what's the culture of your team? Look at, but I can also look at you as an individual and say, hey, how do you stack up against yourself? Right. And one of the tools, and I did it myself, so I can help people also understand, like me in comparison to myself, I can see, okay, I might not be depressed or going through a depressive episode, but me personally, I tend to withdraw, internalize, and it can turn into depressive types of symptoms, even if it's subclinical. And I can know that when I go through a hard time, this is going to be my pattern. I know that because this ASR has given me a roadmap to understand that. So by the time the second session I'm meeting with somebody, I can understand a little bit better what their roadmap is going to look like. And look, the journey of therapy is self-discovery, right? And it's it's an experiencing with someone else as an audience, your therapist, right? So, what do they say about, what's the difference between a therapist and a friend, right? The therapist is focused on you. Hopefully in friendship, it's a little bit more, a two-way street, but you have the luxury in therapy of exploring things about yourself while having someone that's going to push you, test you, grow you, and in a way that's, a self-reflection, almost like holding up a mirror and saying, hey, what are we seeing here? Help me understand this. And then we can deepen that knowledge of ourselves and have another person be witness to that. So I love this tool for that reason, because then I'm able to, see what you say about yourself and what are the patterns that you identify, and how do we start to build a set of goals for therapy around, your own subjective rapport around what you're saying is maybe a little bit more difficult and challenging for you. Cause, my grandfather used to say, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Right. Like if something's going good, that's great. Good. Okay. Let's keep, using those things, relying on those things. That becomes our safety net. But, you come to therapy because there's a presenting problem. Let's understand what that is. Let's have a set of goals around that. Let's use your strengths to, kind of build up and build that security. And then we can hopefully operate, within our deficits or our weaknesses or our challenges, and have a solid framework or foundation to progress from.
So kind of in this whole adaptive thing, that's kind of like safety net, which I think is very similar to what we call the inner armor. That ability, I liken like the thickness of our armor that we have internally is like the safety net, and it's our ability to adapt, because there's people that go through very difficult transitions,
absolutely
difficult times, but their inner armor, their adaptability is strong because of relationships and competence and reaching out to other people. But also we look at building your inner armor, like trying to make that armor thicker. We can't always determine how many arrows will be shot at us.
Right.
And especially for students coming in, they're not expecting some of these things because they're thinking, this is all going to be great. I've been looking to this forever. And then they get their first exam score back and they're like, wait a minute, there's a crack in my armor. Like I can't do it. And that can create kind of an existential crisis for them. Right.
Yeah.
And so we've been able to come in and work side by side with you, Neil, to help develop an inner armor besides what might happen in the counseling room, what you're doing, working on these other adaptability things. But we have this whole other kind of safety net or armor. Can you kind of speak to that and share with our listeners how you're finding that impacting these students when they come in and maybe they don't have as many resources, and then you start giving them these things?
Yeah. And I do have to say, I love the program. And as you can tell, I've really taken to this for a lot of reasons, and I'd love to go on and on about it, but it'd probably be several podcasts long. But, on a very basic level, this metaphor of an inner armor is such a great metaphor, and that's why we call it our resilience lab, and why you use the tagline dynamically resilient, right? Because what we're asking people to do is not to avoid or get rid of, or even have too thick of armor that nothing penetrates, but to be able to say, how do I adapt to the complications that come about, and how do I deal or cope with that in real time? And so some people have fortresses built where nothing's getting in, but they're not getting out either, right? And we're talking about those isolating types where they're so protected and guarded that nothing's getting through. But then you also have some people that, their armor is so thin that they, the first sight of difficulty and they're caving or folding. And what we want to do is we want to have a dynamic resilience that says, hey, sometimes things are going to affect me and it's going to be painful and hurtful, but there are also things that I can do to adjust. And, one of the measurements that I really do love looking at is this heart rate variability. And, Doc, the way you explained it really helped me understand the beauty of the design of the physical body right? And when you were talking about the need for variability in our heart rate, right? We don't want our heart rate to beat every second on the second so that I get 60 beats per minute, but I want variability in how my heart flexes to the current situation. And the more flex that I have, the more flexibility and the more resilience I have. And that was fascinating to me. And it made me realize how much our autonomic nervous system, right? Because, if we're going to talk about HRV, we're going to talk about the brain, we're going to talk about all kinds of, physiological responses to stress. And we need to be able to flex with it as opposed to having a rigid, this is the way it is, this is the way it has to be, but be able to maneuver or move with whatever circumstance comes our way, because we can try to control it all we want, but we're going to be at times not prepared, and we have to be prepared to not be prepared, right? And this is where the armor then becomes that very thing that is going to help protect us. So whether we're talking about HRV or all these other measurements, we now have a window into where is our armor strong and where is it weaker, and we can develop, some coping skills or strategies around that. And look, I could tell you countless stories of the ways that this program has helped me understand what people are dealing with when they walk through the door. I remember one of our football players that would come in to session, and he would come after practice, but an hour after practice or so, right? So in theory, his heart rate should have lowered by the time he comes into a third session. And now he shows up and he's sweating as if he is exercising, and his heart rate is a 126. And for a guy that his resting heart rate should be about 80 or 90 because he was one of our linemen, I'm like, what's going on? Like, you're either exercising right now while you're sitting there, which I know you're not. Yes, you're sweating as if you are, but that tells me that there's something going on in your nervous system that has you so ready to respond. What's happening? And as we talked about the different things going on, it became really obvious what those lions were in his life that he was running from while he looks calm and composed sitting on my couch, but he's sweating, right? And so, I think it gives us just one more layer of information that helps us understand what's going on for this individual, because there were so many strengths I could point out as well about, what it is that makes this person so adaptable and strong. But here we're seeing this weakness in the armor that we can address through some very simple exercises that won't take too long to kind of course correct here.
Right.
He was constantly in fight mode.
Exactly. And you're trying to interact with him in a state where his body and brain aren't ready to do that. And many times the excitement of maybe coming into school or the stress of coming into school, that phone call home where you're trying to, talk through things, or that first meeting with the therapist, those first couple meetings you may not benefit a lot because the nervous system is so amped up. You're running from a lion, and the last thing you want to do is kind of take in this cerebral information. And the cool thing about the inner armor is we can teach you right away how to control the oxygen, how to control your HRV. So in the power segment, so there's precision, power, and focus. And in the power, the first thing that we're doing in power with these freshmen that are coming in is we're teaching them the biomechanics of breathing, because I can have a million things going on around me, but I can control my breath. And that's where it starts, that ability to control it. It kind of reminds me back, and I've told this story before in the podcast, when I first started working with Kirk Cousins, who, now's a, adult and pro athlete, and a big deal. Yeah, it's just on that quarterback series. But when I first started working with Kirk, he was a college student. I mean, he was in college. And I can remember him coming to me, and first time I saw him was 2 weeks before they were going to play Ohio State in the Big Ten part of the season. And they had a bye week. And he's like, hey, I need to be better by Ohio State. I'm like, that's 14 days, bro. Like, I can't make you better in 14 days. And if you asked any therapist, anybody, they would say, I can't do that in 2 weeks. But what we did was we leaned into Kirk's breathing, the first phase of power, and we even went into the refining phase of power with him, where we worked on dynamic resilience for 14 days. And he went out, and for the next 6 weeks, he played lights out, and he was back in control again. And so there's so much of this autonomic nervous system control that these students come right in the door. It's one of the things that we wanted to introduce them with. And that's what we do at Liberty, which is really cool, is that they have the ability to start controlling this.
Absolutely. And you speak to the stuff that I love, because athletes they're going to say, hey, give me the special sauce, right? Tell me what it is I need to do. And part of why I love working in this environment is that very reason, right? Is, hey, if there's a way to do this and they're willing to put in the work, let's go. Right? I mean, that's Kirk Cousins' story, right? Is that, he kept looking for answers and kept doing the things and asking for help and doing all the things he needed to do to just be better. And I loved listening to his podcasts here because, there was some really good, I hope, inspiration for people to understand, like, okay, you can do this and it will be challenging, but it's not impossible.
Yeah. And he kind of had a back to school experience, right? Like he was going into his senior year. We've been talking about freshman, he's going into his senior year. He's doing his craft, his football, but he's also attending classes and thinking about his future. And am I going to get drafted, or am I going to go to med school, or what? But I mean, he was like, it was just years ago, but it was still the same scenario we're talking about, where this crisis comes in and how's he going to work his way out of that? And I think that was the early stages of Inner Armor many, many years ago. And to see that we're now replicating that, with hundreds and hundreds of students, and that you have that right at your disposal. Can you kind of explain to the users, like, how does this actually work? Like, what happens? I mean, you're a therapist. They sort of understand that, tell me about your childhood kind of thing. But what is this? Like, what are we talking about? Autonomic nervous system, breathing, Inner Armor. Like, how does that play itself out in what you do, and why is that important for you?
Absolutely. And again, why I've found such a almost rejuvenation in my professional career is being able to use bio and neurofeedback as a complement to therapy. And look, in my PhD progress, I became really interested in interpersonal neurobiology. And there is something about the nervous system that wants to, one, be in connection with others, but also be in connection with self, right? So when you're talking about presence, we're talking about, hey, can I be connected to myself while wholly and fully present with someone else? And, if we have the spiritual component to that too, we're talking about, hey, how do I integrate this tripod, if you will, of the three main relationships I need to maintain: my relationship with, my God or my higher power, or whatever, your faith tells you, yourself, and your relationship with others. And so, we're able to then say, okay, where is that? Where are you in that process? And how strong are each of those legs to keep you supported? And how do we do that? And so Inner Armor has been great to be able to say, like, hey, how are we doing with this? And how are you regulating your nervous system? And what are the times where maybe that's a little bit more challenging for you? Whether it's an existential crisis of faith that says, hey, I'm, why are these things happening to me? Whatever. And you challenge that part. And again, this is part of the developmental asset too. That's where we started from, right? Is I need to challenge my faith and no longer make it, I love that. We had a pastor that once said, God doesn't have any grandchildren, right? Like, no, I need to make faith my own. I can't just adopt my faith from my parents. I need to have a struggle where I challenge myself to grow and learn what I care about. Yeah, hopefully I take in what my parents taught me because there's some value in it as well, but I also need to challenge it. That's part of the developmental process. But we're also challenging many things. We're challenging sense of self in relation to others as well. How do I get to know myself better, and how do I know myself better in relationship? So how does this relate to Inner Armor? I'm speaking to some of the diagnostic practical stuff that we can look at within ourselves and say, hey, I can do a self-assessment here, but I can also have some other tools that will help me measure how I'm doing in these areas. And so as we break down all the different diagnostics that we have in a very simple sensor, the breathing sensor that we're using, it's giving us so much information. A lot of my football players are getting ahead of themselves a little bit because, they're looking at that generate report at the end and they're like, okay, yeah, they want me to work on recovery points, but, I want to see all this other data. How I do it on focus and calm and presence and all these other things. And I've had a couple of football players see me recently and they're like, hey, my stress scores are abnormally high and I don't know or believe that I'm necessarily stressed. And so, we're getting ready for camp, that started today. And a couple of my football players last week, they're like, oh, maybe I am stressed about going into camp, right? And now all of a sudden we have this measurement that says, hey, I wasn't aware that I was carrying so much stress into camp. But after a conversation, Neil kind of tells me like, hey, maybe it's my norm. And this is what I believe is just the way my life has played out. Wait, maybe I can challenge what I previously have held on to as a belief that this is my norm. Hey, wait a second. Maybe I'm operating with a cup that's already full. If I go into camp with a full cup, how am I going to learn or grow, have anything added to it? I'm just going to be overflowing. I'm having difficulty learning the playbook, or, I'm feeling like I'm not measuring up, or, all the pressures now are too much. I'm going to make the squat. I'm going to get cut. Is my scholarship dependent on this? My coaches are yelling at me. All kinds of things now overwhelm them, right? And so I want to help you say, hey, what is a manageable stress load? What are you coming in with? And how do we help you keep that pile low so that you have more room to add more because the pressures are going to come? And I've got a measurement that says that before they even walk through the door.
Yeah, that is amazing, right? You can see with the bodies, it's like the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah, I love it.
By Vanderkolk. And the body is giving us the dashboard of what's going on, even though our mind says, oh, I'm not stressed, but we're looking at your heart. We're looking at your temperature. We're looking at your skin conductance. We're looking at all these variables, and they're all telling us your body is 2% away from absolute disaster, right? In your brain. And that's the cool thing that you have at your fingertips is you can kind of look beyond the BS meter, right? And you can kind of see, or maybe it's just a lack of presence or awareness, but you can see, oh, this person's right on the edge. And rather than let that turn into severe anxiety, severe depression, and eventually challenge retention in school. I mean, that's a big thing happening in universities across the country. It's not so much the academic load, right, that's causing the issues in retention. It's the emotional, psychological load that these students are getting depressed and anxious to the point that they're dropping out of school because their safety net or their inner armor isn't strong enough. And, it's been neat to watch it at Liberty with you working with your athletes, actually see some decreases in utilization. And I know you can't speak to the specific team, but I thought that was interesting. Can you kind of like in a general way explain what you saw in this last year with a particular team?
Right. And, I would love if I no longer had a job because no one had problems. Right. And I get that there are some things that we can do better as a field. And I want to challenge my profession to continue to grow and get better and understand how these things will support, something like Inner Armor that is getting direct feedback from one's body, right? Like how many people are walking around today in fight, flight, or freeze, and they don't even know it. Okay. Right. And there are diagnostic indicators. Hey, you haven't been very present, or hey, you're spending a lot of time on your phone, or hey, you're not, getting to bed at a reasonable hour, or, hey, speaking of me, I like to eat Chick-fil-A a little too much, right? Like, there are indicators there. And if we're paying attention to what those indicators are, we can pay better attention. But you're right. So I've been able to see some interesting things in different cultures as a team. And look, I hate to even say this again, right? Because people are going to be like, "Oh, Neil, you're crazy." But look, I had one of our teams, and I won't say, but they'll know exactly who they are because I spoke to them last week, and I brought this up to their coach. They participated in the Inner Armor program very diligently as a team,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and they saw some massive improvements. So much so, and again, I hate to even say this on your podcast because now it's going to get out there and people are going to think Neil's crazy. I did not see one single counseling hour from that team the entire semester that they were using this program. Okay, look, and again, this is a team that I have seen most of the people on that team. Okay.
Wow.
Now, look, to go from one of the highest using teams for counseling to a team that no longer needs counseling throughout the course of a semester makes me ask some questions. Now, do I believe that it was the Inner Armor program that magically fixed everybody? No, because look, I'm still seeing some of the individuals from that team. Mm-hmm. And look, there are going to be life circumstances that are going to come up. But when we see the statistics, like, okay, yes, normal life circumstances are going to come and counseling will be beneficial to you. I want to see those people come in. But how many people are coming into counseling because of a very real agitation that's going on, but they may not realize that they're living in fight, flight, or freeze? What if they're better able to manage their autonomic nervous system from spending 10 to 20 minutes, in the Inner Armor program, and now they can reduce their need for counseling significantly because depression lowers, anxiety lowers, quality of sleep improves, calm improves, focus improves. Now all of a sudden they're getting better grades, and this high achieving academic team also, right? And now you get to, the pressures are very different, and they had some culture changes, and there were lots of things going on in that team. But, there are a lot of factors that contributed to what I believe was a very emotionally good time for that team to grow. And so, I'm very excited to see what happens now with all of the supports that we're building, as well as how much we're able to use the Inner Armor program as a measurement, but also help us realize what, about myself, that mirror that I need reflected back to me so I can see myself in some very real data-driven ways, and use counseling in a way that is, I want everybody to come to counseling, right? I think there's a need for it. I think everybody will benefit from talking about what's going on for them internally in a little bit more of an objective place, a safe place to do that. But also, I want people to be effective in their use of therapy, right? I see all kinds of different clients with all kinds of different presenting problems, all kinds of different kind of coping strategies and ways to deal with it. And some people are like, yeah, Neil, I just have a hard time talking about my feelings. Well, yeah, me too. Or some people that come in and use counseling for venting, and they're like, yeah, it just makes me more pissed off and angry, when I leave. Like, I get it. Okay. So let's dial it back and take a step back and take a look at what's going on physiologically so we can have a more well-rounded view of what's happening in the therapeutic context. So now we can better guide through your own self-report, because my body is that indicator for me of how well I'm doing in therapy. And this isn't a measurement of good or bad. This is a measurement of effectiveness. How much am I growing, learning? How much am I benefiting from this? Because look, I want therapy to be a good experience for you. I want you to come in and enjoy talking to somebody about what's been on my mind and just have somebody to bounce this off of. And I'd like you to be able to say, hey, 6 or 8 sessions is good. And I'll come back when the next, major thing comes up, and Neil will help reintroduce me to some themes that maybe I kind of forgot how to use and some tools that I need to use, and just reset, and maybe only use counseling at a very minimal level, but use it as more of a maintenance and have some really solid things in place so that when the next thing comes up, I just check in with Neil for a couple sessions. We get the ship back on course, and now we're headed in the right direction again. Again, I think that the implications of this are massive.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I know our time is coming to an end, and as we leave on this note, I think what you're describing is this perfect merger, Neil, of what we see Inner Armor can do to support you in your expertise role that you do in one, maybe getting individuals before they start to go into crisis, two coming alongside you. And then there's, other times that the diagnostics can really give you an awareness of how to guide your process.
Absolutely.
So how does that all go back to school? Well, since Inner Armor is ready for you, and it needs to be in your backpack as you get ready. And we have a lot of great ways at Liberty to be helping prepare, but also if you want to connect with us online.
Wow, what a great discussion, guys. And thank you, Neil, for your time. And good luck as you begin another year at Liberty. And I know Doc is working at various schools around the country. And so it's going to be an exciting time as everybody heads back. And we pray that it's going to be a successful year for everyone as well. And if you'd like to bring the Inner Armor program to your school or organization or team, go to forgeinnerarmor.com. And if you'd like to learn more about the principles behind the program, go to amazon.com and look for the book, Forge Your Inner Armor, which is available in print, ebook, and audiobook. And join us next time for more of the Inner Armor podcast. This has been the Inner Armor podcast. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Would you please follow or subscribe and make sure to leave us a review or comment? You can learn more about Inner Armor, Dr. Royer, and how to perform at your potential by going to forgeinnerarmor.com.